Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble! Get ready to rumble!
I'm just going to touch on just a few of the key points of each chapter. In the first chapter, we talked about linkage institutions. In a democratic society, parties, elections, interest groups, and the media are all key linkage institutions between the preferences of citizens and the government's policy agenda. We also talked about three contemporary theories of American democracy. The pluralist theory contends that many centers of influence compete for power and control over public policy, with no one group or set of groups dominating. Pluralists view bargaining and compromise as a core to our democracy. In sharp contrast to this, the elite and class theory contends that society is divided along class lines and that an upper class elite always rules. Wealth is seen as the basis of power, and a few powerful Americans or big businesses are the policymakers. The last one, hyperpluralism, is considered pluralism gone bad. Hyperpluralists contend that the existence of too many influential groups actually makes it impossible for government to act. When politicians are trying to please everyone, the result ends up being a confusing, contradictory, just really muddled down policy, or basically no policy at all. I told you to remember, if you were ever asked to give an example of hyperpluralism, that is the reason President Clinton said that his health care plan did not end up happening was because with hyperpluralism there were so many different groups with so many different ideas that they ended up just not being able to come up with anything. The Founding Fathers were heavily influenced by several English philosophers. One we talked about quite a bit was John Locke. The foundation of Locke's philosophy was a belief in natural rights. Before governments arise, people exist in a state of nature where they are governed only by the laws of nature. Natural law brings natural rights, including life, liberty, and property. According to Locke, the sole purpose of government was to protect natural rights, and that government must be built on the consent of the governed, and it should also be limited. The Declaration of Independence was really a political statement announcing and justifying a revolution, and you saw a lot of these phrases and a lot of these ideas come out from things that they had studied from the philosophers. The Articles of Confederation, that was our first governing document. It was extremely weak and gave all the power basically to the states. The national government had no way to tax. There was no executive branch, no court system, no way to regulate commerce. Changing it was extremely hard because you had to have unanimous consent on amendments. And during this time period, we also, for the first time, started getting a middle class. Also, a post-war depression was affecting farmers. Some of them were unable to pay their mortgages, and some of their houses, their farms, were being foreclosed on. Ultimately, Shays' Rebellion is an event you are familiar with that is going to make everybody realize that maybe we need to get a different structure for our government so we can keep things in line and not have to worry about things getting too much out of control. The delegates who were sent to Philadelphia when we realized that the Articles of Confederation were not really working for us, their purpose when they went there was just to tweak the Articles and make it better for us. They did realize right away that that was just not going to be enough. So they decided to just scrap it and start over. They did agree on several things, and they had very different opinions on other things. James Madison, he is considered to be the father of the Constitution, was perhaps the most influential member in translating and becoming the government architect behind it. 55 delegates went to the Constitutional Convention. They were mostly wealthy planners, successful lawyers, merchants. They were rich men. Many were creditors whose loans were being wiped out by cheap paper money. Many were college graduates. As a result, it was not surprising that they would seek to strengthen the economic powers of the new national government. As property holders, these leaders could not imagine a government that did not make it its principal objective to preserve individual rights to acquire and hold wealth. James Madison started talking about factions. We know he would go on to write Federalist Paper number 10, where he would discuss factions, which we know today is like interest groups and political parties, and that they would arise, he believed, as a result of the unequal distribution of wealth. One faction he saw is the majority, which was composed of the many who had little or had no property. The other is the minority, which is composed of the few who held much of the wealth. The delegates thought that if left unchecked, either majority or minority faction would become just out of control. The founders believed that the secret of good government was a balanced one. A limited government would have to contain checks on its own power, and as long as no faction could seize the whole of government at once, any kind of bad situation could be avoided. The Founding Fathers were very leery of democracy. They feared putting too much power in the hands of the common person. They believed that human nature was self-interested and that inequalities of wealth were the principal source of political conflict. And they also believed that protecting private property was a key purpose of government. Madison and his colleagues feared both majority and minority factions. Madison believed it was essential to keep most of government beyond people's power. Under Madison's plan, voters' electoral influence would be limited and mostly indirect. Only the House of Representatives would end up being directly elected. Senators were to be elected by state legislators, which would go on to change with the 17th Amendment. Presidents were also to be indirectly elected by the Electoral College, and judges were to be nominated by the president. So they kept a lot of power out of the people's hands. The Madisonian plan also provided for a system of separation of powers in which each of the three branches of government would be relatively independent, so that not one single branch could control the others. However, the powers were not completely separate. A system of checks and balances was established that reflected Madison's goal of setting power against power to rein in and constrain government's actions. The framers of the Constitution, remember, were not a fan of democracy, so they did not favor setting it up as a direct democracy. Instead, they chose a republic, which is a system based on the consent of the governed, in which power is exercised by representatives of the public. Once the document was written and it was time to go through the ratifying process, a battle would ensue between two different groups that would form: the Federalists who would support the Constitution and the Anti-Federalists who would oppose it. The Anti-Federalists were particularly concerned that as part of this document they had not included a Bill of Rights, and that would be what would be the underlying sticking point for them, because they feared, they remembered what it was like living under British rule. Eventually it's going to go back and forth, and a compromise is going to have to eventually be made where the Federalists do promise to, in the future, write a Bill of Rights, and then the Anti-Federalists go ahead and they take the chance that they will, uphold their end of the bargain and go ahead and participate in the ratification process. And ultimately, obviously, we ended up with a Bill of Rights, so the Federalists did keep their word as well. All right, we're going to go through some typical multiple choice questions you would see concerning these topics from the first unit, and that way it will refresh your memory on some of the items that we have not covered. Okay, in this one, the answer was E, both A, B, and D. It could not be the presidency because linkage institutions are what are linking us to all of the, government institutions like Congress, the president, the court systems. It's the things that link us to them. So if you see any of the main institutions, it's not going to obviously be one of those. The reason the answer here is D is because when the government decides not to do something, that is also considered the public policy. So non-decisions would also be part of a correct response. At the heart of the elite and class theory of politics, in addition to extreme wealth, you will always find big business. A through D, they were all included in the original Constitution. The reason E is incorrect is because freedom of speech was not in the original Constitution. Remember, it would not come until the Bill of Rights, so that is why E is the answer here. Remember that the founders wanted to keep most of the power beyond the control of the majority, which are the people, because they did not trust them. So that is why A is correct. And they also wanted to make sure there was a separation of powers between the different institutions that they did create. You had to have 9 out of the original 13 for ratification. Obviously. The President has absolutely no formal role in amending the Constitution. The House and the Senate must, they propose amendments, and the states have a part in ratifying the amendments. They're usually proposed by 2/3 of Congress propose it, and then 3/4 of the state legislators ratify it. The House of Representatives is the only body we have always directly elected. They are the group that is considered to be most close to us. The senators were not originally directly elected. They were chosen by state legislators. After the 17th Amendment was passed, we began to get to directly elect them. We still do not directly elect the president. And with the judiciary, you know that the president nominates federal judges and Supreme Court justices, and the Senate has to then approve them. We don't have any part of that. There are 27. Out of the 27, 26 of them have been proposed by Congress and ratified by the state legislators. Only one was ratified by state conventions, and that was the 21st Amendment overturning prohibition. It was Congress's request that it be ratified by state conventions.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!